of the 1,000 Plateaus reading group through the new Center for Research and Practice. This week we'll be dealing with the third plateau, which is the Geology of Morals, and the 14th plateau on the smooth and the striated. So these are two really interesting plateaus that are actually a lot closer than I initially remembered when planning the schedule, so I think that worked out well. And especially the third plateau is pretty crazy and out there. And I found it quite a bit of fun to read. But if Hyacinth, if you have a couple questions that you want to start us out with, that'd be great.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's incredibly appropriate that we undertook reading the third chapter as like the sun entered Cancer. So we're reading about how, God is a lobster and the sun has moved into the sign of the lobster. But I really only came up with 2 or 3 questions. And I guess the first one can come at the beginning or at the end. But it's my first question is like, what is a geology of morals? What is the purpose of the geology of the morals? Because I mean, that title is like, what does the earth think that it is? That's just a really, I don't, but and then the next question is, what is the mechanosphere? So I guess like both of them are questions of something mentioned at the beginning and at the end, and that's really my questions, and I'm sort of interested in what other people have to say before I don't know, comment further.
Well, something that's really interesting is that like it's called the Geology of Morals, which it's definitely a play on Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, but where's the morals?
Yeah, I sort of got the feeling that it was like, this is like how it could be, or it's like the groundwork for morals, and like the geology thing sort of persisting throughout the entire bit of it, just in the basis of talking about the strata as the way that sedimentary rocks are formed. So like the basis of most rocks that we come into contact with. But like there's also this plane of consistency kind of thing, which to me was bringing up like ideas of volcanism and like igneous and sort of kinds of rocks. This sort of smooth space where all of the sedimentary substances are sort of moving around and not yet crystallized. And there's also a bit, I don't know if it's in the bit about the signs, where he's talking about transduction and induction. And this made me sort of think about, again, with the geology, the way that metamorphic rocks are formed in sort of subduction zones. And I don't really have a good idea of how the metamorphic plays into their geology here. But I definitely got the feeling that the strata was sort of this sedimentary process, and the igneous sort of feels more like the plane of consistency of the magma beneath the earth. So, I don't know.
I was thinking about the geology of moral thing. Is when I read it, I kind of have been, as we wrote earlier, that there's a very humorous aspect to the text. And one of the fundamental things that is happening is that the professor that is starting the lecture has made a mix-up between a textbook in geology and biology. So and that's kind of, for me, also the geology of moral thing there is that it's kind of like a mix-up here that is going on. If you try, and also maybe the joke of it is when you read a text that you do not find any morals in it, and that's kind of the joke that it's not a moral text. But there's this kind of confusion at the beginning where you will, from the beginning, you will always talk. You will build up this kind of schema to be able to talk about different aspects of reality at the same time, and this is the double bind of it all, that you will somehow always use this double bind to talk about things rather than separating them. And that's we can get back to that. That was my initial thought.
So we're definitely dealing with two things here, right? We're dealing with the plane of consistency, and we're dealing with the like double articulation. I can't remember exact so there's the ecumenon and the plananon or something. And they don't like tell you what those terms are directly, but the ecumenon, I can't say it, is like the stratified space, right? And the plananon is the smooth space. So we have these two things, and well, what I think this chapter is doing is talking about how you get from one striated space to another. And you get from one striated space to another by passing through the middle. And in the middle of these two things is the smooth space. And somehow, and I think that the smooth space is very much the sort of virtual or plane of difference, a plane of intensity that's acting on the striated space, on the ecumenon. And it does that somehow by way of the abstract machine. I don't understand the abstract machine at all. I don't know what it is. I don't know if you can say what it is that might go against it being in the smooth space by attempting to give it a representation. But I know capitalism is a abstract machine, but that's about it. But I think they're trying to show how you get from one ecumenon to another, and you get to it by means of this field of intensities, this middle ground that is a smooth space that's outside, that can't be represented in the way we want to represent it, or else it would just be striated again. But yeah, it's these two things, and how do they work, the smooth and the striated? And I guess I'm getting into the other chapter, but like that's what this chapter is dealing with a lot, is these two planes and how they interact.
And I would like to share another thing now with the reading of this chapter and see if you can relate to it, because there is maybe in this chapter more than the other chapter, also the ones I have read but I can't remember now. There's actually a story involved in this chapter. There is actually a storytelling here, and I would like to like go through that story and just to like see, because I see it. He has done like a little short story with Professor Challenger. That is somehow that he wrote it in some way, and then it fills up with a lot of stuff between. And as I interpret the story, and if you follow along the story, this is like how I felt, and I can also feel this in the reading, that somehow you start with this lecture, and in some sense everyone is there. You start with very common concepts, and you talk about the biology, and you talk about geology, and somehow everybody is share the terms here. But as you go along, there is this amazing part in the story where people start to leave. that somehow they cannot handle this, and then he says that the only one who could stay behind were the mathematicians and the archaeologists, and I can see it now, the archaeologists, and there are 3 more people, and the singular individuals, I think. So when you read through the text and you start thinking about it, there's like thresholds that you start to, and in the end, like there's nobody there listening to to his lecturing, and then he starts go out in this very, very strange discussions, and we can like go. You can I think you can separate these different parts, and then in the end, he actually himself like enters into this plane of consistency that he was talking about, like becoming this plane of consistency. And I think there is some kind of journey involved in this chapter. I feel it. I don't know if you share it, but there's like something you have to go through. You have to think through certain stages, and then you have to like pass through these kind of stages to see what he's talking about. I'm just putting it out there. See if you share it with me.
Like, I think that's definitely true. Like, I think the story of Professor Challenger is one example among all these other examples that, but like, you don't think about it as an example. It's a short little story. It's a ton of fun, but it's an example of what they're talking about. And what I've been feeling on this read through is that this book is like a pure act of experimentation, right? That each of these plateaus are experimenting at what. So there's this desire to try to like experiment to overturn the current strata or the current milieu, right? But we don't know how to do that. We can't just do the absolute negative deterritorialization that they talk about in Anti-Oedipus, because that would lead to fascism. So instead, we have to do this experimentation where we like pull at little threads and see what happens and see if it works. And if it works, then great, then we keep going with it. If it doesn't work, then we have to leave it alone. And I think each of these chapters is like an attempt to pull at this thread of this zone of indiscernibility, this plane of consistency, right? They use all these different terms to talk about it because they're experimenting with it, because you can't talk about it as you would something in the striated zone. So you have to just experiment with it. And Professor Challenger, who's a character, I don't know if this has any relevance at all, but he's a character written by Arthur Conan Doyle that he was publishing alongside Sherlock Holmes that never got. He was like this mad scientist, I guess. But this is just, it's an experiment, this sort of thinking through how it works in a fictional human, this sort of change, this sort of move towards this zone of indiscernibility. Professor Challenger, the story is an experiment.
I got the feeling that it was that the chapter is almost like a I guess a cosmology. Like, it's describing how everything came to be in some way. And this this brings up something in Smooth Spaces, are the smooth and the striated, that oh gosh, Simon just brought up, that only the mathematicians had stayed by. And this made me think somewhat about, they bring up Riemann manifolds and spaces, and that's based in non-Euclidean geometry, which I have very little experience of, but I do know a little bit about the toruses, at least on the surface of them. And I keep thinking, I guess maybe because I think visually about this sort of structure, and I get the feeling that it's yes. So it's like I think of these strata as in a torus, as making up this donut, and in the center there's this abstract machine that I guess is always there, and it's replaceable and movable, and I get the feeling that it's like they're describing the Earth, but it's this pluralistic kind of thing. Like there's a bit where they're even, I feel, acknowledging like the, what do you call them? Not the Geosophists, but like Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner towards the end, where they say that we shouldn't think that we got to these sort of languages and whatnot through an evolution. It's sort of like a panpsychism that essentially like consciousness develops in stages on this earth, and it's only a product of this earth. Like I get the feeling that it's like a biomimicry thing. They're trying to write this whatever, and they're trying to write a theory of the earth. And I think the morals part of it is sort of, it's been a long time since I've read Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals, but that morals bit is like a capitalism, or this abstract machine that's at the center of the strata, has slowed down the speeds at which these things happen. And maybe not slowed down, but made them thicker or something. And so it's no,
I would just say this: capitalism speeds it up.
I think, granted, I think the speed is like there's a bit at the end where water is spilling out of Challenger, but no one's sure if it's getting thicker or just more watery. I guess that's what I mean if I had to retroactively correct myself. But I got the feeling that it's like pushing towards some kind of biomimicry, where you and your lover can be like the wasp and the orchid.
I really like how you take in this, I call it theosophist perspective or hermetic perspective. I sense that there is, exactly as you say, it is a cosmological attempt, and I sense it because how I read it and how I've been thinking about it is that, like, how do you, the world is something that is expressed somehow towards you, but when you're like, but what is that is your experience is on so many levels at once. Like when you experience reality, there are so many levels, and you have like this molecular level, like everything is molecules in some sense. So you can always say that everything you experience is molecules, but that would not make sense. Like that's not really what's happening. But you also have this organic strata above this somehow that is coming towards you. But also you have these multiple levels going on. And how I interpret them is that each of these levels or these stratas, like the Earth has all this, because it says that like the Earth is this body without organs that has this all kind of stratas. But each strata has a binary poles somehow, and they are always like I see it like this dance in each strata, and I think is very clear about it, and they are like always moving separately, yet in a symbolical or in a simultaneous or univocal fashion. And when I say that the abstract machine, how I interpret it is that somehow this is like what makes everything, all the stratas spin somehow. that is like the machine behind it all. And I think the end chapter is that it's like this dark he's quoting H.P. Lovecraft, I think, that like behind it all there is this cosmic rhythm which underlies all mystical gate openings, the mechanosphere, the rhizosphere. That somehow there's this behind it all, there's this kind of machines that keeps all these strata together somehow. And also that we can move through all these different strata because they are all simultaneously available for us. You can always say like I'm only molecules or I'm only molecules, but you can never take just one of them and say like this is it. You always have to have this multiple, and you have a relationship between them. I stop there.
It like the H.P. Lovecraft bit is really interesting because I think it's from the Gates of the Silver Key or the something like that. But in that story, the Carter, I think, goes and becomes this great Magi who then loses his body in some crazy ritual and then is re-territorialized as this crazy manted wizard from another planet, and he then comes back to Earth. But it's I don't want to talk about Nick Land or Sadie Plant. But it's damn that fuck. It's never mind. That figure of the Magi, I guess, is just very. I get really fixated on thinking about them as basically these magicians who are trying to do something and doing something very effective. I just got really vague, but to talk about Nick Land, since Dave said something, there's a bit in CCRU where they're talking about Atlantis, I guess, and I disagree with where they go with it, but this morals bit of replacing this abstract machine in the middle that is slowing things down or speeding things up or whatever, to replace it with, like, I might say a Gaia, something that actually is moving at the speed of everything else. But I've completely derailed myself, but someone cut me off.
So I wonder, so my thought is that the abstract machine is sort of the driving force. I don't know. I haven't really seen this word. My understanding is it comes up somewhere in the text, but personae. I think it probably will come up in the faciality plateau, but it's sort of like the subjectivity of a milieu or something, but it comes from the outside, not from the milieu itself. So capitalism is really like this smooth force, right? It's a smooth force, but it also blocks. It's like this weird combination of the two. It's like an unfolding of smooth space with blockages. But I read the abstract machine as sort of the subject that produces the change within milieu by way of intensity. So it is, I guess, the organizing force rather than something that is simply just alongside the milieu. And I don't want to give it like this divine character. Because it's immanent, right? It's not like transcendent. It's not God, but maybe it is the double pincer. I don't know. Maybe it is God. Maybe it's Spinoza's God. I don't know. but it doesn't seem so. It doesn't have like an ontological priority, but it at the same time is like this subjectivity that's driving things that we can't really talk about because it's on the smooth space. And so I think that's why it's so hard for me to try to understand. Like, I understand the smooth space, I understand the striated space. It's how these things intersect that's the difficult part. And I think that there's two things that do this. It's the metastrata, I think, and the abstract machine, and somehow those two things work together. It's like the metastrata are the part of the striated space that intersects with the ecumenon, which interacts with the planonon, and the abstract machine is part of the planonon that interacts with the ecumenon. And those are the two things that I'm super lost on, because it seems like the double pincer has to do with, like, I'm not sure if that's the abstract machine or if that's intrastrata or what, but I'm not super sure how the expression and content I'll go with this either, but lots of terms that are confusing.
Maybe not to get totally lost, but I will read a quote here from page 50, where it says there is a single abstract machine that is enveloped by the stratum and constitutes its unity. This is the ecumenon, as opposed to the planomenon of the plane of consistency. And how I interpret this is that you have this, each strata has something that makes its unity consistent, that makes it. And I see like you can use this chapter, and then if we've read like the Nomadology, or you have read other Plateaus, and somehow this kind of is the mathematical or a deeper level that explains other stratas that he will go on to discuss. So earlier we've discussed like the nomad versus the state, and we have like realized that they go in and out of each other, and they always move like in and out of each other. And he has been discussing that how the state throws out the nomad, and nomad becomes the state, and then they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is how I interpret it, abstract machine. Like each strata, each binaries has this kind of movement between them. So each strata is in themselves a little machine, an abstract machine. It doesn't exist, and it's therefore it says like this. There's enveloped by the stratum, like the stratum. It's an inner thing. It's not something that comes outside of the strata itself, but something that consistent in the strata. That's how I interpret at least this.
Yeah, that's helpful. But I think that does play into it being this sort of subjectivity of a striated space.
And I also think that like, but the what envelops all of the strata is not that he makes a dichotomy here, and that is like all of the strata does not compose a new strata. Somehow everything is on this plane of consistency that is like beyond all the strata. There's this plane of consistency that is this low key, this I would say it's an abyss, or I would say the German philosophical term of Urgrund, that comes like this dark abyss, which, and that's what he ends the text with, this dark abyss, that somehow there's something beyond all of this, but also using the term consistency, that it binds everything together. Like all of the strata, they do take place on this plane of consistency. So he makes like this is how I read the cosmology of it all. Like you have this urgrund that he calls this plane of consistency, which is like the depth of it all. And then on this depth is this striatedness, like this expression of different levels. But what moves it all is this abstract machine that like moves everything. And that you talked about the Gaia thing there. You said Hyacinth like moves at the same speed as everything. Like somehow that this is like a philosophical cosmology, but you have very like basic concept actually that you can find in very different other contexts. I would say like it's open towards many other contexts, but he uses these terms to talk about it, and he can also therefore use a very scientific and philosophical language. So it's kind of like he forces us to think in very hermetical categories by using a very academic language. But he's forcing us actually to wrestle with very cosmological ancient questions. That's how I interpret like what he's doing here.
Is there any relation between the term that you were using for the plane of consistency and what Spinoza calls substance or nature?
If we think about the Earth as a body without organs, then maybe.
Well, it's not the Earth. It's
like, I mean, but like being, right? But if we think about being as a body without organs, then they would be the same sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Yes, I don't know if being is a body without organs.
It is. Deleuze explicitly says it when he says Spinoza's Ethics is a book of the body without organs.
Yeah, so then that would, because the plane of consistency is the body without organs.
Yeah, but I'm trying to see if there's like a link between this term that German term that they were using and like the Spinoza's term. Oh, I think they're muted.
I think you're onto something. I would say that like this is Deleuze like working in a lot more detail about something he like found in some sense in Spinoza and a lot like, but he's working it in a totally and much more technical and much more modern context, I would say. But he still has this. He learned something about the univocity of being from Spinoza, and that's that. But he has, this is like a totally different apparatus. So there's linkages, there's analogies to Spinoza, but he still is trying to make a much more complex rig or apparatus to analyze being in its depth. And Spinoza did not. If we read Ethics as a reading group, and it's not that detailed. It's rougher in a sense, and this is a lot more technical, I would say. I don't know if you agree, but but there is, as you say, there is analogies, but this is much more technical and uses a different apparatus, I would say.
Well, I think the relationship between the Ethics and A Thousand Plateaus we can get to in so Deleuze's use of, I can't remember exactly what it would be described as, but like the three-part system kind of put together by Foucault in On the Order of Things, where there is classical thought, which is interested in the infinite, and Spinoza is still very much interested in the infinite. And then we get to modern thought, I guess, with like Kant, and so it moves past the intimate, and it poses a different problem. It poses the problem of finitude, and I think Deleuze is trying to like follow Nietzsche in moving past finitude towards like the Superman, because like, so if infinity is interested in the divine, infinity is interested in man, and Deleuze is interested in the Superman. But like the Superman is purely speculative, and so this book is working through similar problems like Spinoza, but in light of a different problem.
Yeah, I agree. I can say, yeah.
I think it's the word, what is it, eukumenon, sort of made me think of ecumenical. So my Greek's really bad, but I think that word has something to do with like universe, or like the Earth as like a world. But that sort of made me think that there's like the eukumenon is the way that sort of everything has come to be, like this not the set of all possible realities, but the current reality. Whereas the plane of consistency is sort of this plane upon which all, like, the difference between space-time as a whole as compared to our generalized experience of space-time. And I mean, there's some connection to Riemann there, but I'm not qualified to speak on that. Yeah, so the eukumenon and the plane, so I guess universe, and then the whole blanket, or whatever you want to call
it. I think you're right, and I see the difference. And he does this in the text somewhere. He makes the difference between, he calls it the scientific world and the German word Umwelt, which is your space that you inhabit. Like we inhabit, what we inhabit is striated space. That is what we are in. We are somehow in the inhabited portion, like, of the universe that is very striated. But that is not, you have to separate, like, and he says, like, but beyond our inhabited world there is a scientific world that is consistency, that is a very that is something completely other. And if we would like experience that without our like conscious filter, we would like die. We would never be able to comprehend this world outside of our eukumenon, outside of our little striated space. This is what keeps us separated from, like, facing this, you know, like, we don't see every color, we don't hear all sounds, we have very like limited consciousness. But if we were to experience all of this at once, we would explode. Like, we couldn't handle it. So that's how I also see, like we live, that is the ecumenon opposed to the planeomon, that we have to, and I would say that also, like, this is coming from difference and repetition. Like, the pure difference, we cannot handle it. We have to live in like a very repeated world to be able to exist. We cannot handle complete pure difference. That would kill us. And that is also why there's always this caution, this warning, that if you go too far, and also Challenger is like, he's dying in the end, like he's going somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know if it would kill us, the pure difference, but it would make communication impossible. Right? Because we can't communicate without generalizing things. If we were to think of like each individual leaf on a tree as a separate sort of being or whatever, it would be impossible to talk about anything. We couldn't talk about leaves on the trees. We would have to talk about each separate individual unique thing as its own sort of, and we couldn't even do that, because then we'd have to go down into we'd have to go to the atomic level. We'd have to go to the smallest particle and talk about it on that level, and that's impossible. So like, our brains work by generalizing and stereotyping and meshing things together. And this isn't bad, but it's bad when those become dogmatic. Right? So, like, I don't know. Like, the UK this week, they Supreme Court of the UK did not allow people to put neutral genders on passports. So this is like the thing. Like, why is there a gender on your passport? And why does it become this dogmatic thing that has to fit a certain identity characteristic? Right? So the problem is not necessarily that we've clumped genders together or that people identify as genders. The problem is when you make a legal decision that is based in this dogmatic rigidification of these categories, or something like grammar, which is instituted as a tool for communication so we can understand each other. But there's a certain balance to be held, right? Because if somebody's grammar is horrible, you're not going to be able to understand them. But on the other hand, when you let grammar become dogmatic, you end up worrying about things that don't matter.
Yeah, I think that's interesting on the question of grammar, because the poet, her last name is Gums. Can't remember her full name, but she sort of is talking about, okay, so we know that grammar is terrible for children, especially Black children. So she invents this poetic world wherein Black grammar has been instituted as a way of teaching children. And it's essentially about the way that breakdowns between like subject and verb in Black grammar, how they might not be useful at all, how they structured how these children began to perceive each other. If there was no me speaking, if me has been shortened to a transitive verb, then that action is communicable through the entire classroom in this poem. And so it's not a question of, totally getting rid of grammar and doing what some language poets of the 90s did, which was just throwing stuff in sentence structure and letting it mean something. But it's this just completely different code that is possible of some revolutionary changes, making children, completely forget their subject-object divide.
Well, and I think that presents like a really interesting example of the sort of change that occurs, right? Because the grammar police, we want to call them that, are like these Oedipal sort of figures who are blocking any sort of change in the striation. They want the striated space to remain striated. They want everything to remain as it is. And the like the natural tendency of the grammar system is to change, right? Because grammar it always changes all the time. Like how we talk today is drastically different from how people talked 200 years ago. And my question now is whether this new grammar is that a relative change? Is that a relative deterritorialization or an absolute one? And how do we think through those differences? Because that's something that comes up a lot. Did it come up a lot in this chapter? I think so. This sort of like change that is simply happening within the strata, and there's the change that happens as a result of the metastrata. And I think this might get to your second question about it has to do with like technology and techniques, right? The mechanic strata. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but that might tie in here as well, I think.
Coincidentally, the school ends up capturing this Black grammar and then turns it back against it, which is a terrible turn. But I a lot of her poetry is sort of concerned with this idea of techniques of how you teach white children who have been taught since very young thing. Mommy did this, whatever. The way that she goes about sort of separating the children from the pronouns that represent them, or that was a really big question there. And it's a really big question in poetics nowadays of how do we break this more than it was before, when it has been.
There's all sorts of like, this kind of gets away from like the Deleuzean part of it maybe, but like ethics surrounding like the capture of language too. Like who is doing this capturing, who is instituting the rules. Okay. And things of that sort. So Jason just messaged me, and so we have to end in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So maybe we should talk about that other topic you wanted to talk about for the last 10 minutes or so. I can't remember what it was.
The mechanosphere, basically. I was really sort of interested in what that was, because it comes out as like, he says, or they say, that there is no biosphere, there is no noosphere. So there's not like, there's not anything for the, I said earlier that I felt it was going towards a ethics of biomimicry. But they sort of dash my hopes there by saying that there is no biosphere, there is no noosphere, there is no sort of transcendent thing. Instead, everything that is working is just this mechanosphere. So I took that, like you said, of technology, of sort of the tool relationship of, or I pictured in my head sort of what tool value does oxygen have to chlorine, and thinking about this. They say that this book is a book about pragmatics. So I don't know. It was difficult to think of really what they're meaning here. Yeah, tools versus weapons. That's interesting.
Yeah, I just think that the tool versus weapon thing is interesting, because in the nomadology, it's really tools on the one hand and weapons on the other that are producing these changes in the various structures. So I wonder, so I think part of the mechanosphere has to do with like the desiring machine things, like everything is very Machineik in Deleuze and Guattari. And I wonder if it has to do with like the univocity of being, right? That everything acts on the same sort of level. There's not, well, I don't know. I'm reminded of like Guattari's 3 ecologies here, where he talks about the various ecologies, but he suggests we can talk about them as like consisting in the same sort of, having the same sort of properties as one another, and that they intersect and interact with one another. I think it's just doing away with this separation. So there's still like a biosphere, but it doesn't act differently than the noosphere or the Machineik sphere. It's that these things act in the same way, and they're not separate from one another. They're all interconnected. And they're all organized the same way.
I don't know if it's this chapter or another, but where it talks about the hand and the tool, like what that somehow biology, like the hand belongs to the biological sphere or the strata, but somehow it reaches a kind of complex level at some point where it's able to make a relationship with like the stone in some sense, and when the hand like is able to reach this, you have a thumb, then you can hold the stone, then you can create an apparatus together with the geological strata, which is what we're doing, and thereby creating a third realm somehow, where we now are in a technosphere, which is dependent on the geological sphere. So the biological and the geological is raised up to a new sphere, which is for me, that's where technology happens. This is where we live our lives. Like this is a, you know, we were watching screen made out of the little precious, you know, metals and stuff like that. We have entered into a geological sphere, and that's also techno machine, that it has this other stratas within it, I think. Yeah.
So the last line of the chapter, when Challenger is disappearing, suggests, well, I'm going to start on the second last page, but the figure had now reached the abnormal clock, and the watchers saw through the dense fumes a blurred black claw fumbling with the tall hieroglyph door. The fumbling made a queer clicking sound. Then the figure entered the coffin-shaped case and pulled the door shut after it. The abnormal clicking went on, beating out the dark, cosmic rhythm which underlies all mystical gate openings. The mechanosphere, or rhizosphere. I don't know if that helps at all, but there's some sort of relation with the rhizome here.
Because of the Lovecraft code, I'm like compelled to. There's an interesting thing there about magic, that Carter in this Lovecraft book or story was practicing magic, and the thing that he's going to, I can't remember if in the story he goes off to some greater work in the period of going from mantid alien to human or back. He encounters this world that is essentially the plane of consistency. It's just dreamy goop that he has no body in, yet he experiences himself as this intensity moving through it to this planet. But I think at the end of the book, he comes back for a scroll to basically access this plane again, because this is where he meant to go in the first place. And so I think the bit there where Challenger has been completely, he's just disappeared into the coffin, is like a call towards a sort of magic, not the kind of magic that we see in Nickland, but like a magic that it's like a magic. My understanding of magic is that it's a tool with multiple uses. It's a weapon as well as a tool. It makes the fields grow as well as, you know, smites the unjust ruler. And I also think there's a bit about a poison garden earlier, which calls back both to the geology of it and also to this magic of poisoning, where, you know, you kill Caesar by feeding him his favorite mushroom, but you put some poison mushrooms in it.
But isn't there, like, what is the difference here between like some kind of mystical experience of like what has been described in so many other terms in different religions and different types of context? What is here is described as becoming a body without organs and like experiencing the plane of consistency, just to, and then to go back into the striated space, but still have this experience, this knowledge that there is this kind of other experience available. Isn't, you see what, isn't this like also ties into a lot of like mystical experiences?
I want to say that it's like a decoupling of magic from the mysticalness of it. Like there is the tools have been taken away from us in a way. Like Marx's thing of, you know, when you're making hamburgers, you're not making it on a grill you own. It's your boss's grill. That I hate to use this example, but the Bluetooth symbol being a rune that is used for magic or for domination over an opponent. That I want to say that they're, because they are so materialist in the way that they approach things, that it's a decoupling from magic, using of all of those signs and tools that have been used. I'm not even really sure about this.
So, are you suggesting that like this sort of materialist magic is sort of like the tool that they're trying to produce to escape something? I don't know, like escape the apparatus of capture, or escape capitalism?
I hate to use this example, but in the work of Rudolf Steiner, when he's talking about Atlantis, the Martians came to Earth from Mars, and they were conquering the Martian civilization and trying to make this immense machine that was capable of destroying the world and had destroyed Mars. And the Atlanteans work with them to use this technology against them. And this sort of materialist magic, I guess, it's both an ethical tool forward as well as one that has always been here. Like, I don't want to be so basic as to say, like, yes, growing gardens and planting them in geometric formations is going to save us, but like, I think it's a matter of intensifying that permacultural practice. Yes, it needs to be folded in the properly way. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that's happening in cryptocurrency and decentralized computing is very effective for that, like Hollowchain, which is seeking to make a market based on biomimicry. And I'm still learning, but it seems to be a kind of materialist magic.
Well, so that's pretty much all the time we have. Unfortunately, we didn't get to talk about Machineik enslavement, which I think is a really cool way of thinking about how capitalism works on the smooth space. And I think it's something integral to keep in mind, the sort of different Machineik enslavement, as opposed to the traditional sort of striated disciplinary model. I think that within Machineik enslavement, we're seeing a shift towards what Deleuze would call the societies of control, or what Deleuze calls, or what Foucault calls biopower. And I think it's interesting that these things come about really as a result of like computer algorithms. Like their predominance comes about because of computer algorithms. They're algorithmic before that as well. Like the Nazi concentration camps are algorithmic, but they're not. They're pre-computer. But I think that the Machineik enslavement is something really important to keep in mind, and I really appreciated their descriptions about that in the final plateau. And maybe we'll get to that in future weeks. But next week, we're going to... It feels like we're going in a little bit of a different direction. We'll see if that happens, but we're reading plateaus that deal with sort of art and psychoanalysis. And there are really three that I wasn't sure exactly where to place in the reading order, and so they kind of just got jammed together. But the first one is the 8th Plateau, 3 novellas or what happened. The second is Of the Refrain, which is the 11th Plateau, and the third is the 2nd Plateau on One or Several Wolves, which kind of gets into a little bit more of the critique of psychoanalysis, which is present in the first book of Capitalism, it's Schizophrenia. But we're just about at time now, so thank you everybody for coming this week. I hope to see you all again next week. And if you have any questions or want to discuss anything, feel free to use the group that we have or the chat. There's been some really interesting discussion in there so far, so let's hope we keep it up. Thanks, everybody.